There are several key moments in the life of anyone who is part of a high-control organization like Jehovah's Witnesses. Moments that determine whether a person will remain inside the organization or walk away. I'm talking about those moments when a person begins to have doubts. That's precisely why the organization will do everything in its power to make sure that the person being manipulated suppresses those doubts and then keeps them hooked through other forms of stimulation. But how do Jehovah's Witnesses actually get their followers to suppress their doubts? In this video, we're going to analyze their latest Watchtower, dated June 2026. And by doing so, we'll uncover how the leaders of Jehovah's Witnesses manipulate the Bible to convince their followers to suppress their doubts and remain loyal to the organization. Ready to discover how these leaders operate to keep their followers hooked? If so, let's begin. The article we'll be analyzing is found on page 2 of the June 2026 Watchtower, and its title is How to Remain Loyal When We Face Tests of Faith. It's interesting how the first 3 paragraphs are actually quite solid, because what they do is tell you things that, as a believer, you'll almost certainly agree with. And then, almost without you even noticing, they begin to convince you that your salvation depends not on remaining faithful to Christ, of course, but on remaining faithful to them, to the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses. Let's take a look at what those first 3 paragraphs say. But pay close attention, because there are 2 specific phrases in these paragraphs that, while not necessarily incorrect, will later be used to weave their manipulation. The paragraphs say, "This speech is shocking. Who can listen to it?" That is the way that many of Jesus' disciples reacted to statements Jesus made while he was teaching in Capernaum. Jesus had said, "Unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in yourselves." And he continued, "Whoever feeds on my flesh and drinks my blood has everlasting life, and I will resurrect him on the last day." Those who were deeply offended by Jesus' words stopped following him. Did they not have any faith in him at all? Actually, before this incident, some, including Jesus' disciples, were so impressed by what Jesus did that they said, "This really is the prophet who was to come into the world." So it is evident that those disciples had a degree of faith in Jesus. But when their faith was tested, they did not remain loyal to him. The apostles reacted differently to Jesus' words. When Jesus asked them if they wanted to leave him as well, Peter answered, "Lord, whom shall we go away to? You have sayings of everlasting life. We have believed and have come to know that you are the Holy One of God." Notice that Peter did not say that he and the other apostles fully understood the meaning of what Jesus said when he told them that they needed to eat his flesh and drink his blood. Regardless of what they understood at that moment, they chose to remain loyal to Jesus. Why? Because their faith was based on an undeniable truth. Jesus was the Christ of God. Did you catch the key phrases? They're right there, almost at the end of paragraph 3. Let me read them to you again. Peter did not say that he and the other apostles fully understood the meaning of what Jesus said when he told them that they needed to eat his flesh and drink his blood. Regardless of what they understood at that moment, they chose to remain loyal to Jesus. As I mentioned a moment ago, these phrases are not necessarily incorrect. It's true that the account doesn't tell us whether Peter and the other apostles fully understood what Jesus meant when he spoke about eating his flesh and drinking his blood. The issue lies in how this phrase is later manipulated in paragraph 4. As we read the paragraph, try to spot where the manipulation is hidden. Our loyalty to Jehovah can be tested in a number of ways. For example, how do we react when we learn of an adjustment in the understanding of a Bible verse or of a change in the way that the disciple-making work is organized? Or how do we react when we find it hard to understand why Jehovah allows us to suffer some kind of tragedy? Did you catch it? In this paragraph, without stating it directly, and without you even noticing, they equate the teachings of Christ with the teachings of the organization and loyalty to God with loyalty to the organization. And they focus on something that, right now, concerns them more than anything else, making sure that the changes they've introduced in recent months don't make you doubt. What changes am I referring to? The most recent one is this. On March 20th, in Governing Body Update number 2 of 2026, the governing body authorized Jehovah's Witnesses to receive autologous blood transfusions, that is, transfusions using their own blood, something that was previously forbidden. Naturally, many Jehovah's Witnesses might be asking, how is it that before, the governing body told us it was Jehovah's will for us to die rather than accept a transfusion of our own blood, and now it says it doesn't matter? A very logical question, without a doubt. But the article makes it clear that a witness must suppress that question if they want to remain faithful to Jehovah. Faithful to Jehovah or to the organization? I can't help but wonder. Not surprisingly, the paragraph also mentions that you may find it hard to understand why God has allowed some kind of tragedy to happen to you. Some kind of tragedy, of course, could mean losing a loved one who rejected an autologous transfusion, something that would not have happened under the policy made public by the governing body on March 20th. These men are truly ruthless. They're playing with people's lives. By the way, if you're enjoying this podcast, give it a like, share it with someone who might benefit from it, and subscribe if you haven't already. You can also join the channel membership. That way, you'll get access to special content where I can speak more openly about sensitive topics. Click the link in the description. Thanks to those who have already joined. Your support makes this content possible. Let's continue. On another note, a Jehovah's Witness might also start questioning the criteria used to determine why some practices with pagan origins are acceptable, while others are not. For example, birthdays and Christmas often create tension between witnesses who don't participate in these celebrations and their family members who simply want to spend time together. For decades, the governing body has taught that God rejects birthdays and Christmas because of their pagan origins, and yet, they have never objected to the use of wedding rings, which also have pagan origins. Another clear example is the change in their stance last year regarding toasting. In the past, they were very concerned about its pagan origins, and today, they say it's simply an act of camaraderie. Faced with situations like these, a witness might reasonably wonder whether the governing body is being completely arbitrary in deciding which practices are acceptable and which are not. And when those doubts arise, this Watchtower is very clear. If you have doubts, suppress them. Be loyal to the organization, just as the apostles were loyal to Jesus. At no point do they stop to consider that equating loyalty to Jesus with loyalty to the organization is, in fact, heresy. A witness might also question why, for decades, the governing body applied the passage in 1 John chapter 1, verses 10 and 11. A passage where the Apostle John instructs believers not to even greet those who deny that Jesus came in the flesh, to all those who had been removed. So much so that if a witness encountered a removed person on the street, they would look the other way. Or if that person attended a meeting at the Kingdom Hall, they would be treated as if they didn't exist. But when the government of Norway denied them state subsidies, among other reasons, because of how they treat those who are removed, suddenly they realized that those verses did not apply to all removed individuals, and they changed their policy. Now, the article suggests, as they have also stated in other publications and videos, that if a witness does not understand a teaching, or in this case, a change, that is not a valid reason to leave the organization. In this way, as they often do, they shift the responsibility for their contradictory doctrinal changes onto their followers. In other words, what they're really saying is this: it's not that our changes are contradictory, or that our decisions are arbitrary or unbiblical. The problem is that some witnesses simply don't understand properly. And so, when a witness begins to notice the deception, they are taught to suppress their doubts. And using the scriptures as a pretext, they are told, just as the apostles remained loyal to Jesus, even when they didn't fully understand all his teachings, you too must remain loyal to us, even if you don't understand the changes we've made. When the reality is not that the witness fails to understand the changes, but that those changes expose the lies and hypocrisy of these men. But let's go even deeper. At this point, the witness, without realizing it, has already swallowed the heresy we mentioned earlier. The words of the governing body are now equated with the words of Jesus, and leaving the organization is equated with leaving Christ. Just as the apostles remained faithful to Christ despite not understanding everything, witnesses are expected to remain faithful to the organization despite their doubts. In this way, the teachings of the organization become just as life-giving as the words of Jesus himself. But let's see how paragraph 6 reinforces this heretical viewpoint. What helped the apostles to remain loyal to Jesus when many others abandoned him? The apostles were convinced that Jehovah is worthy of worship because he is the maker of all things, that Jesus is God's Son, who has sayings of everlasting life, and that Jesus has Jehovah's full support. Now, rather than consider many specific ways our faith can be tested, let us focus on 3 truths that can help us stay firmly grounded regardless of what tests we may face. They are: 1. Jehovah is the creator of all things. 2. Jehovah inspired the Bible. 3. Jehovah is backing his people today. If we are thoroughly convinced of these 3 truths, we will remain loyal when we undergo tests of faith. In this final paragraph, the comparison that once tried to be subtle becomes blatant. It compares core Christian doctrines, such as Jesus being the Son of God, that he has words of everlasting life, and that he has the full support of his Father, with their own doctrine, the claim that, according to the article, Jehovah supports his people today. And by his people, they are, of course, referring to the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses. If at this point a Jehovah's Witness still hasn't realized how this idea has been slipped right past them, that remaining faithful to Christ is being equated with remaining faithful to the governing body, and that faith in Christ's sacrifice alone is no longer enough for salvation, but that loyalty to the organization is also required, then that person is deeply indoctrinated. This is the typical Jehovah's Witness who passionately defends one doctrine today, and tomorrow, when the governing body changes its position, defends the exact opposite with the same level of conviction. At that point, there's nothing left to do. The person has been mentally enslaved by these men, a group that has caused immense harm, and that calls itself the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. From here on, the article shifts its focus to giving Jehovah's Witnesses reasons why they should believe in God, in the Bible, and in the idea that the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses has divine backing. My next video will focus specifically on challenging the claim that this organization alone has God's exclusive backing and the arguments they use to defend it. But in the meantime, would you like to know how this organization moves millions of dollars through sophisticated financial instruments? Click the link in the top right corner. See you soon.